Hello, everyone, and welcome to Speaking of the Arts. My guest today is Michael Fox. Michael and I go way back, and I've wanted to have him on the show for a long time, so I'm so glad we finally found the time to get together and chat. Michael Fox is the founder and owner of the booking agency Fox Performances, LLC. He previously worked as the Midwest agent at International Music Network. And as a side note, you can actually check out episode 12 of Speaking of the Arts, in which we featured the founder of International Music Network, Scott Southerd. In Michael's tenure there, he booked national tours for Buena Vista Social Club, Wayne Shorter, Terence Blanchard, Ladysmith Black Mambazo, Dianne Reeves, and many, many others. In addition to booking artist tours, Michael Fox also works as a consultant for San Antonio Parks Foundation to help curate Jazz is Alive, that's jazz space S apostrophe alive, an annual 2-day jazz event in Travis Park. Fox has also served on panels at the Arts Midwest and APAP conferences, as well as a handful of colleges, speaking about the cultivation of global music audiences, activism in art, and artist representation. Fox holds a master's degree and artist diploma in double bass from the College-Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati. Our conversation covers a variety of topics, including Michael's own unique approach toward running his booking agency and what he is looking for in terms of prospective clients. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Michael Fox, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, it's really good to connect with you. There's a lot of questions I'd love to ask you and dive into everything that you're doing with your own agency. Maybe just for a little bit of context, I'll just put out there, you and I have known each other for a long time, like a long time. I would say over 10 years at this point, maybe?
Yeah, we're coming up on that, I think.
Somewhere in that ballpark, a long time. And yeah, I mean, I've always thought you're one of the, really good in like all the senses of the word, agents in our field. Good, yeah. I mean, obviously you're successful for your artists, but you're also just genuinely like a good person to know, to work with.
Thank you.
And I really mean that. And so over the years, obviously, any opportunity you and I have had to kind of work together or just talk about music and the whole music business life and all that has been something I've really appreciated as we've gotten to know each other. So yeah, it's just really great to connect with you. And also, I'm still bittersweet about the fact that we crisscrossed, we were ships passing in the night with your family recently relocating back to the East Coast, my family moving from the East Coast to the Midwest. We just miss each other, but that's okay. We'll see each other again in person at some point.
Yeah, hopefully. And also I think the fact that you guys are in Southeast Michigan, which is not far from where my family is, like I'll probably see you next time I'm out that way. So
absolutely, you and Jillian are always welcome here.
Thank you, and same to you. You should come out to Newport.
Don't worry. If I'm back in Newport, I will not be at your place. I will be stealing somebody's yacht, and I will be living the good life as one should do on the water out there.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, man, take me back to the beginning of Fox Performances, because to go off on your own, as I know, is a bold thing to do in and of itself. And, tell me about kind of starting the agency, and then I'll let you answer the question yourself. But my impression was you really hit the ground running, getting things off the ground, and then boom, a pandemic.
Yeah. So
what that was like.
Yeah. So the impetus for creation of the agency was partly because of COVID. I have had for a very long time really specific ideas of how I like to work, or the way that slight variations from the way that I was taught to work. And I think that there's a certain boldness to it, regardless of when you deviate from, your training, which for me, I was with Mark Balin first, and then I worked for IMN for a long time, and I learned really important lessons from both of those agencies. But for me, there was this desire to really follow my ears, which I think that you can kind of attest to, and because I think there's a big difference between folks like us that started as musicians or studied music and transitioned to this side of the field versus folks that come at it from a different angle. And so that's the way that the roster has formed, and that's the way that the roster continues to take shape. Is it's, I hear something really compelling, and that inspires me to connect with that artist and then have a conversation about touring, or that person's touring already, and maybe there's a thought that I have about ways that we can get closer to their ideal, which is a big thing that I start with when I have that first conversation. Is I ask, where do you want to be?
It's funny you're saying that, because I was just speaking to somebody. And I actually was not aware of this until she was talking to me. But maybe you're familiar with. There's a website called careersinmusic.com, which
I'm not familiar.
I had never heard of it. But the reason I bring it up is because she wanted to have a general conversation with me, very general booking conversation for students, music students who are interested in music industry. What does a booking agent do? All these things. And I naturally led me to talk a little bit about my background, but I said pretty much exactly what you just said, which is, for me, and I think you would agree with this too, it's very, and you've had this experience, I was always very bad at trying to pitch an artist or book an artist that I really didn't care about, which is what you just said. And and I brought that up in the conversation with her, because it's interesting to me, because we all know there are actually really good agents who can book all types of artists, even though that artist might not be their preference, but they might not be very passionate about the music. And that was always something I really struggled with. Was it was just really hard for me to sell the act that if I wasn't really into it, So I'm right there with you. I'm not at all surprised to hear you say that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so you so COVID happens, and you kind of have this opportunity, I guess, to go off and start your agency. And I know that was something that you had been thinking about for a while, as a lot of agents at larger agencies are always thinking about. So what were you kind of? How did you kind of stay really motivated, knowing you were doing this at a time when we couldn't really do live music? Like, how did you navigate that?
I think that one of again, this goes back to like going to music school. There is this general concept of practice. So, you go into a practice room and you play an hour of scales, and then you go through you go through maybe some exercises, and then you actually start to go through the material. And that's kind of, once I got the website up and once everything was actually a fully formed thought, that's what it became. And I think that also part of what informs me too is, before I started on this part of the music industry, I was a telemarketer for Cincinnati Symphony. And so we were given these like half sheets of paper, and it would have the person's name and address up here and their phone number. And then on this side were all the concerts that they went to and any of the benefits that they've ever had. And it was your job to call them and get them to subscribe, or to get them to give money to the symphony. And during a 4 to 5 hour shift, I would call like 300 people. And so it did become this same kind of practice of like, in your head, you have to be like, okay, I need to make so many points of contact during a day in order to continue that flow of information. So it almost became about that in the beginning, because I knew that I wasn't going to book anything new. It was about creating this flow of information and these points of contact is sort of like what I was focusing on.
That's so funny. You and I are so similar. So I was also a telemarketer in college for a summer, except unlike you, who you were at least doing it in a field that we like, I was working for a company called Stone Research Services. And this is in Bloomington, Indiana. And we would get the marketing company would get hired by advertisers to collect all this marketing research. So the one good thing about it was that we never worked on a program for more than a week, if that, because that was, because let's say there was 30 or 40 people working there, we would burn through the contact in about a week. But like you just said, it sounds like you kind of had like a script or something you had to read from. I had a script, and we had to just call and get people to fill out these surveys about any experience they had with a company to then give that company. So I'm just bringing that up because I didn't know we both had that experience, and I would like to think today I got some benefit from it. Like I think I could say learning to speak clearly on the phone and enunciate, and and let's face it, like trying to get a complete stranger to stay on the phone. Right. There is a skill in that.
Yeah. No, and one of these books behind me that you were asking me about by Blair Singer, Sales Dogs, one of the things that Blair talks about a lot is that cold calling is a skill, but the means to an end is not what most salespeople think it is. So it's actually exactly what you're talking about. Cold calling isn't to actually secure sales. Cold calling is to build your confidence and teach you how to talk on the phone.
Makes sense. I would agree with that. Well, could you say the name of the book? What was the name of the book again?
Sales Dogs. And it's by Blair.
Dogs?
Yeah, okay. Blair Singer. So Blair Singer actually breaks down different personality types, and he attaches them to a dog breed. So there is your classic pit bull, which that's what everybody thinks is the only type of salesperson, which is the person who's really aggressive and will attack anything. But then there's also the golden retriever, which is that salesperson is really focused on service and relationships. There's the Chihuahua, which nobody wants to be a Chihuahua, by the way.
I don't think I would.
But the way that Blair classifies this is a person who's really focused on product knowledge. And I think in a lot of ways, you and I are that way, where it is really about the knowledge of the work and the practice itself of artist representation. And then there's the poodle, which is that person's all about like looking really good, like being really, selling really high level clients. And it's all about projecting this image of confidence. And so the idea behind the book, what you're supposed to get by the end, is you're supposed to identify your breed, but then also adapt the good skills from each other breed.
Okay. I'll have to check it out. I'm always looking for anything to make me a better salesman, for sure. I can talk about this stuff all day. I mean, along those lines, have you read, it's called The Ultimate Sales Letter?
No.
Let me grab it right here. I'll have to send you a copy. There's a bad glare on my end, but it's called The Ultimate Sales Letter by Dan Kennedy. So Dan Kennedy is like one of the foremost copywriters, like if you think about like the traditional advertising agencies, and they used to write actual copy. so he had a background in all of that, and then I honestly don't remember if he kind of went on his own, but either way, he became known as this guy who could help companies and individuals really craft incredible sales letters. I've gotten a lot out of it. You should definitely read it.
Yeah, I mean, because of so much of what we do now is in the written word. That sounds really useful.
Absolutely. So absolutely. Yeah. All right. So why don't I'd love you to just talk about some of the artists on your roster. I mean, maybe briefly, you don't have to talk about all of them, but just for folks listening, so they got a sense of who you're working with. And now that hopefully we're starting to see more shows happening and more shows being booked, maybe some of the folks listening would even have a chance to check out some of your artists as they're starting to tour more.
Yeah. So something that that we talk about a lot in our house because of Jillian's festival, but also my own artistic efforts is striking.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't mean to interrupt. Why don't we just tell people what festival she's running so they know?
Oh, okay. So Jillian is my wife, Jillian Friedman Fox, and she is the executive director of the Newport Music Festival, which is a classical music, chamber music festival that happens in Newport, Rhode Island. And so one of the things that she and I talk about in terms of the artists that we champion are those that strike a balance or have some sort of vision that it both acknowledges tradition, but also have a really interesting idea of artistic innovation. So those two things kind of dovetail into each other. So each of these artists that I rep have a distinct way of approaching that, but they all have that sort of feel. So I represent 17 different artists. One of them is actually a live film projection artist named Andrew Scott. And I actually met Andrew when I moved to Dallas. He's a good friend of Terence Blanchard, who's another artist that I represent. And I didn't completely understand what Andrew was doing at first. And he invited me to his lab, which he's on faculty at UT Dallas. And I walk into this room and it's like, a visual artist's playground. And so you have these giant sculptures on the wall where he builds these things out of like cardboard and paper, like 3D printed objects that are huge. And he actually teaches his students how to do these 3-dimensional projections. So I walk in there and he shows me this whole sequence that looks like just animation to me. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And he says, well, watch. And so he projects this onto the screen. And what you see is that each part of the signal is attached to a different part of the sound that's coming out of the speakers.
Oh, wow.
And then he starts to move something within the image, and you realize that he's animating in real time. So in addition to that, to this live animation, and that he has this programming that kind of interacts with the music, he also, and he gets so pissed off when I tell people about this, his secret sauce is that he also will integrate a live camera feed into that. So when we did the project, he was the visual artist for Caravan, which is a live music and dance project that Rennie Harris produced and directed. Rennie Harris, the choreographer, and he would so in the middle of this show, while all these projections are happening behind the band and behind the dancers, he's grabbing these images of the dancers and the band and mixing them into the animation. So super cool. Yeah. So So Andrew's sort of the outlier in that way, and he's a lot of fun. So I you know, a good portion of the roster kind of follows that quote unquote jazz side. So I also represent Tana Alexa, Somi, Brandon Coleman, Ben Williams. There's a cellist that I represent that also is a singer-songwriter, this guy Gabriel Royal. You may have seen him at Newport. He played Newport Festival. I think he played Storyville. Okay. But this guy's like a brilliant songwriter and has a beautiful voice, and accompanies himself on cello. And then the other half of the quote unquote half of the roster kind of lives in this acoustic chamber music kind of world. But what's interesting is that at the moment, I don't really have anything on that side that, especially for like a classical music kid, is just like, you know, a piano trio doing, you know, Brahms and Schumann. You know what I mean? It's a lot of these artists on the more classical side of the agency have something in their work that's really non-traditional. So for example, Maeve Gilchrist is a harp player. She's also a member of Silk Road Ensemble, but she improvises. So, I mean, I know that for you, you're like, okay, yeah, so did Alice Coltrane. But in the world of classical music, that's so crazy. I mean, for people to be like, oh, wow. The other side of it too is that this is a completely different instrument than what we know to be like the lever harp. This is a Celtic harp that like she actually uses. She manipulates with her hands instead of her feet. But
I'd love to check it out because I used to, for years, I worked with Edmar Castaneda, who that's one of those artists where you're trying to describe it to someone and you're like, you know what, you have to watch a video. But I would love to see what you're talking about because I didn't know before I was working with him. Like most people, I had a conception of what the harp is.
Yeah.
And he has completely changed that, and it sounds to me like your artist is doing the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that, you know, when we think about artists that are like music directors, you have this mental map of all of the notes. And in most cases in the classical music world, that person is a pianist. And in jazz, it tends to sort of float between lots of different instruments, all the way to, you know, somebody like Art Blakey, who's a drummer. But the interesting thing about her musical map is it's built on this instrument that has this what we would think of as being like a very limited range of expression, because like the harpsichord or other instruments that are stringed like this, it doesn't project really far. But the music that she writes, I mean, this is the crazy thing. Her album Harp Weaver is herself, acoustic guitarist Kyle Sana, and then a string quartet, the Izuri Quartet. And the sound that she gets from this group and the writing is like a lot of the other artists that I work with, has almost like a cinematic quality. And in fact, her harp work has been featured in a DreamWorks film. But the sonic, you know, bandwidth of what she's doing is so wide. And I think that this is an artist that will, as her career develops, she'll end up being a music director for like major, like symphonic projects. We're going to be doing a harp concerto commission coming into the 22-23 season. She's a lot of fun, and she's a great human being, which that always helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just to interject, it's fun listening to you talk about your artists, because I think one thing that is sometimes gets lost in our industry, like in our side of the industry, I should say, is that yes, there's a lot of agencies, booking agencies, but at the end of the day, I really believe like the ones that are successful are the ones that really follow the vision. There's this connection between you, the person leading the charge, right, and being able to identify these artists that you're seeing and have them articulate their vision. Yet it also, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, even though I haven't heard of the projectionist or this artist that you're describing right now, I'm listening to you describe them, and it feels like it just makes so much sense to me that you are working with those artists. And like, I mean that, you know what I mean? Like, I mean that as a compliment. Like, it's part of your aesthetic, and I think it's worth mentioning too, because like you really, obviously you're helping them get their voices out there and get more recognition. But you're also creating like another space within this world that we live in, right? It didn't exist before you did it, and I think you should. It's really cool to see in the short amount of time you've been doing this how how many artists you're representing, and I'm just so happy for you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I think what's critical about your approach and my approach and the ways that they're similar is, I remember really early on when I was working for Mark Balin, that's how I know the folks from Turtle Island Quartet. And David Balakrishnan, the founder of that quartet's also like one of my mentors, and he's like my spirit animal in a lot of ways. And one of the things he told me, like one of my first years as an agent, that I think we were talking about, maybe we were talking about music. I don't remember the context, but I remember him saying this line to me, and it's stayed with me ever since. People can tell when you're telling the truth. And that's different than saying people can tell when you're lying. But when I feel like people, when they can tell you're telling the truth, they gravitate to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what it is about the way that I represent these artists. Is there's such a intentional way of like forming these relationships with these artists and really making it about their music here and now, but also, one of the first questions that I ask these artists, and you can ask my artists for verification of this, which is like, some of them I stumped, but the big question that I ask them is, which artist do you see in the present that you'd like to model your career after? And I feel like that question, in a way, gives me a sense of like, okay, what kinds of activities is this person wanting to do that they're not doing yet? And so then what can we be doing in the short term to move them in that direction? One of my favorite answers to that question, I asked Brandon Coleman that. And of course, like, I don't limit it to the music world. And of course he didn't. And so he's like, I see what Jordan Peele is doing. And that's kind of the direction, which, if you think about it, I mean, the Key and Peele show, he had this sort of this sketch comedy show, and he built an audience that way. And now what Jordan Peele is doing is so expansive artistically, and it's really, really serious. I mean, when you watch his films, Us, Get Out, like, these are films that like are chilling, but also address these like really universal, social ideas. And so it when I go back to Brandon's music after having that conversation with him, I understand that now. You know, I hear the depth of yes, his music's really fun and it's funky and it's something that, like, you know, when I heard it for the first time, I heard one of the tracks from his album Resistance, and I tried to show off because at that time I worked for Maceo Parker, and I was like, "Oh, what P-Funk album is this?" And he's like, "This isn't P-Funk." but when you know that his intent is to move to take this music that has a lighter side and in a really serious way integrate these really, like, deep musical concepts, you hear the nuance in what he's doing.
Sure.
You know.
Well, and also that speaks a lot about Brendan, as he clearly has a vision for himself, which is not always the case with artists. And,
sure.
Right. And so that's there's a whole dynamic there too of maybe it's an artist who is working on something really amazing, or they're putting out music that's really amazing already. But that's kind of, you get the sense that, like, okay, that's all they can do in a way, meaning what, you know, like, you know, where do you go with that new music, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to the artist who is more established and is putting out music that you would expect he or she to put out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But just to kind of circle back to what you were saying, that's a great question to ask an artist, and also, yeah, I love his answer. I was thinking when you were saying, one of your mentors was saying that you can always tell when someone's telling the truth. One of my mentors always likes to say, all progress starts by telling the truth.
Yes. Yep.
And I think about that a lot, because I think you can attest to this, but there is always a disconnect in an artist's mind of, no matter how humble the artist is, there's still a disconnect of where, you know, basically scratching their heads wondering, like, where are the fans?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Specifically, I'm talking about, like, up and coming artists, newer artists, right? There's this kind of disconnect there. And I'm always amazed that they haven't taken the time, or if they have a manager, that person hasn't taken the time to literally just sketch out what are, like, the actual numbers we're looking at in terms of fans. And, especially because now there's really no reason not to. It's so easy to use social media to just simply pull the numbers, run the the data, and yet time and time again, I'm not. Maybe it's just me, but, like, I'm just so amazed that, like, this hasn't been done. And why is the artist or the manager so surprised that there's that disconnect? And it's really because they haven't started with the truth. Like, what is the truth? Where is this artist currently at?
Where indeed are we?
Where are we?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to go off on, like, a management tangent with you, although we certainly could. I don't know. It's just, it's just amazing to me. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think also, that Zen saying, like, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So it's also understanding that, like, even if you have this amazing following, the way that you continue to cultivate that, and the way that you continue to develop your audience, is by doing what you did, which I think.
Yes, in some respects, the artist has to work even harder. I would argue.
Oh yeah. No. I mean, and that's a, that's a thing. That's a thing where, it's one thing to grab someone's attention. It's another thing to hold it.
Yeah. Time and time again. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's what we want as agents, is we want artists that have a loyal following, because that shows that person understands the mechanics of, like, relating to other human beings.
Right.
But I think in a broader way, just for, the way that they relate to their audience says a lot about their artistic trajectory. Somebody that can switch gears mid-career, the old Bob Dylan going electric thing, I think that pissed a lot of people off when that happened. And I'm not saying that because I'm in Newport. I'm saying it because that was like one of these sharp turns that an artist took. And I think that different artists are able to make those kinds of pivots mid-career or within the scope of their career, and it affects their audience in a different way.
Yeah, do you manage any of your artists, or are you just doing booking?
I'm sort of an acting artistic consultant for a few of them.
What does that mean?
I mean, so like I have a little bit more input. Like this whole thing that I'm doing with Turtle Island Quartet now is more of what a manager would do. So I'm executing this this commission that's an evening of original music written for and by the quartet, but a lot of the way that we talk about the commission, the structure of the commission, all of this was stuff that I came up with. But of course, like the real fabric of the commission is the music, and I'm not writing any of that. So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, so David and I had this conversation, and we were like, we want to do something that's broad, but also really helps to define to the audience like this brand identity of what the quartet is. And so, we are commissioning Branford Marsalis, Rhiannon Giddens, and Jared Tate to write original music for the quartet. And then of course, David is a Grammy-nominated composer. He's going to contribute 15 minutes of music to the program also.
Very cool. Is that something that will happen the 22-23 season?
Exactly. Yeah. So, and the idea for us is that like this kind of celebrates the scope of music that quartet plays, which Jared is a member of the Chickasaw Nation, and one of the concepts behind Turtle Island, the name, is that it's a shared Native American myth that that North America as a continent was actually formed by basically the creator scooping earth from the ocean and putting on the back of this great turtle. Wow. And so it's one of these myths that unites a lot of different First Nations in North America. And when I told Jared about this project, the fact that I'm focusing on these composers that represent like these North American genres, he's like, you're literally making a Turtle Island record, which is like this recording, this touring project that spans the scope of American roots music.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really cool. Have you ever, so you mentioned the relationship for you is more of like an artistic consulting capacity. Have you ever thought about formally managing any artists? Is that something you would ever want to do?
I mean, there are certainly artists that where I'm really either they're self-managed or I have an interest in their career. I have thought about it. But I think that there is sort of a groove to what we do as agents that I like that moment of like, especially this time of the year where like we're still, especially now because all bets are off because of, we're in the post-COVID world, but like one of my favorite things early in my career was like this time when we're almost starting with a blank slate with brand new projects, and we're going into the conferences and we're having these conversations and everybody's super excited and there's all of this potential. Like I love that. And I think as a manager, you're looking so far into the future that you don't get that kind of cyclical kind of feeling, and you don't get to have that sort of blank slate. It's also so continuous.
Well, I would also say too, the challenge that I've also thought about it, and my challenge is that I don't want to say that one is easier than the other, although what attracts me to the booking side is that it is very much more clear cut, for obvious reasons. Whereas the management thing, and I struggle with this because of, sometimes it's not as tangible, and I think you can hide behind certain aspects of it, as opposed to if you're a manager, as opposed to getting out in front of what is this artist doing, and where is his or her career going, and how do I navigate that, and how do I push it that way, and instead you just kind of like hide behind travel details or stuff like that,
Right.
So it is difficult in that respect. It really is. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I get asked the question, like, how do you know when you need a manager? How do you know when you need an agent? Right. And I've started to consistently answer that by saying, unless it's really obvious, okay, that there's so much work coming in that clearly, you need an agent or a manager, both. Unless it's really obvious, I think a better investment for a new artist is actually to hire somebody, or if they have to figure it out on their own, to just get killer marketing chops and like really understand how to craft incredible videos, understand how to craft, how to cater to different social media platforms. The whole notion that the first time anybody experiences your art as an artist is not going to be live. It will not be live. It will be digitally. And I always make the analogy, like, you would never book an Airbnb property whose photos were atrocious.
Right.
You would never do that. And in a lot of ways, it is the same idea with an artist who's just starting out. You have to invest as best as you can in the best quality materials and output of your art, because the first experience we as listeners have with it is going to be digitally, or maybe it's a video. Right? What does it say about you if you haven't created something incredible, taken the time to really put that quality through? What does that say about you as an artist, and what are you going to be like on stage? It's pretty black and white. So I'm just making the point that that I think at this stage, that's a better investment for like artists that are just starting out, is like either learn it yourself or hire somebody to really get killer marketing happening for you.
Yeah. I think that there's never a downside to learning. Like, one of the things that I stumbled into when I started the agency is I'm like a huge fan of Canva.
Canva? Oh yeah. That's how I was able to get the logo up here.
Right. No, so I mean, I live on that platform on my weekends, because that's where I've designed my entire website, all of the materials that go up on my social media. That's all. And, before the launching of that user-friendly platform, I would have had to teach myself how to use, Photoshop, which is hard.
Yeah.
And so, but that's one of the things that I think artists, right now, should know, is they should know how to take their own photos and manipulate them into really beautiful marketing materials, and to write copy and to make things that are really compelling, because that also helps to communicate your vision internally.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, I want to ask you just a few more quick questions here. We've
Sure.
covered a lot. So what ultimately is your vision for your agency? What, best case scenario, we don't really have to cancel too many shows in the months, and let's just assume optimism and we can get back to things happening. Where would you like to see things in the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah. So, that question that I asked my artists, I recently asked myself, whose career do I want to model mine after? And my career model is the chef Thomas Keller. And he's the only chef I think in the United States it has two restaurants that are 3 Michelin stars. But he's also somebody that understands the value of mentorship. And my favorite story is I think it's one of the early seasons of Chef Table. There's a chef that's now like a 3 Michelin star chef in Chicago.
Is that Penelope?
Yeah, it's Penny. Sorry.
Okay, for our listeners, that's Michael's dog.
Yeah, she's cute, but she's a pain in the butt. So so this guy comes up with this sous chef of his comes up with this dish that's where he I feel like it's melon, but then he has this sort of foie gras foam, and anyway, it's like this amazing dish, and they make it in the kitchen, and they're about to put it on the menu, and Thomas Keller stops him, and he's like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And he said, "Well, I don't understand. Why wouldn't we? This is delicious." He's like, "Well, someday you're going to go out and you're going to have your own menu. Like, why wouldn't you save this for your own menu?" So understanding that and not putting people in that box of saying like this person's going to live and die here, and looking out beyond and looking at the horizon and saying like, really what I want is I want to mentor people that go out and make the industry better. And I mean that in the most earnest way. I mean, I think that I understand that like I can't create an army of like mini me's, and that's not really what I'm trying to do. But I think finding people that are going to look within and really develop their skills and from their interests and what they're passionate about, what they care about, that's going to be a gigantic priority for me moving forward.
Well, and that's also on you as the leader, the entrepreneur, right? You are putting out like a bat signal into the world of what your agency is, the brand, the aesthetic, and the attraction will come to that from that. Right. So I hear you, because I absolutely try. That's a goal of mine too, for sure. Yeah. Well, this has been a really good conversation. Is there anything we should talk about that we haven't? Anything?
No, I mean,
how can
this
people
really
listening find you and connect with you, for people who want to?
Oh, right. So my website is foxperformances.com. All my information is there, but then also I do take a lot of time and energy to curate my Instagram and Facebook feeds, which are part of my whole communication device for other artists and presenters. So if you look at that feed, that's intentionally crafted for people in the industry.
Awesome. And is it, they can just search for Fox Performances on Facebook and Instagram? And
that's right. Yep.
Great.
Thanks,
well, Michael. It was really good to see you and connect with you.
You too. You too, buddy. This is great.
Yeah, for sure. And I hope I can see you soon in person. I'm not going to go to any of the hybrid regional things in the fall, but I'm definitely planning on going to New York in January, assuming things are okay and continue to get better.
Yeah, same. I'm going to go to these regional things just because, I put a lot of energy into trying to help Arts Midwest kind of push the virtual side into something that's a little bit more that's more functional than last year, which they've gotten a lot of guff from the industry on their platform. So but I agree, like APAP is going to be the ultimate sort of family reunion, and it'll be really fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there, because it's going to be a celebration if it happens. Hopefully it happens.
Cool. Well, thanks again for your time.
Yeah, buddy. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.